Hey everybody, welcome back to the next deep dive of Wargames decks, Wargames coalitions, whatever you want to call it. I'm not gonna do this, I think, for like the individual ANZAC, Japan, and South Korean nations. Maybe I will, like in short format, right? Because they're much lower in terms of unit quantity. But yeah, last time we had US. I think it's only fitting that we do USSR this time around. Now, I should say that I'm not the best USSR player. At least in one versus ones, but that's not gonna stop me from giving you my incredibly qualified opinion. I'm gonna have the armory tool up here again. I hope I don't forget to turn it off when necessary, but I don't think it should be necessary. Alright, let's hop in. USSR, of course, also gets a 10% availability bonus, if I'm not mistaken, yeah? Just like the US. So something like a USC is gonna be 7 Picard instead of 6, but yeah, let's go over this. Alright, BMD 1K. I don't think there's really ever a reason to use this when you have the BMD2 available, right? The armor is the same, the speed is the same. You lose autonomy, but that's not really a huge deal. Look, I'm not gonna say autonomy doesn't matter on CVs. It's rare that it matters. I've seen it matter on the Finnish Jeep CV, but I think the autonomy there is much lower. Either way, I think you're much better off with the BMT2 because of the autocannon. Not only is it in general better than the Grom against ground targets, it can also do it against air targets, right? Yeah, it can defend itself pretty decently, given it's a CV. Two front, two side, protected from like 75% of all sides against high explosive, or at least reduces the damage. Yeah, 10 HP fast for Picard is pretty standard. It's just a solid CV that doesn't cost an arm and a leg, has acceptable availability, and still is like reasonably survivable. BVP or BMP, same story as the BMD. If you had to choose between these two, if you're playing like a Cat C deck, I'd go for the BMD. Because 2 front, 2 side is better than 3 front, 1 side. And the Malyotka is irrelevant. T72 CV if you want the decently tanky CV. That is like not hugely expensive and also it's 3 card. T80 UK, of course, the mother of all tank CVs. Pretty much, ignoring like on stats wise, pretty much the best tank CV in the game. Not necessarily utility wise, sometimes you rather have a cheaper tank CV that still has reasonable armor, but it is what it is, right? There's, of course, in case you don't know, a neat trick you can do if you're playing tactical games, right? Wargame forces you to start with a CV, right? So if you play a tactical game and you get like 300 points to start with, at least 100 points are already gone for a CV. And if you're 10v10 tactical on mudfight, you only need like 4 CVs max on the map. What you can do is play Soviets, have this as your only CV, and then you essentially pay 100 points for T80U, right? You are forced to spend 100 points anyway. So if you put only this in, so you are forced, you have a T80U. Of course, you can just buy a T80UK and then sell your USC. But let's say you start with 250 points. 100 points go away for the USC. You have 150 points left. You can't buy a T80UK and then get rid of your USC because you only have 150 points. That's the scenario that I'm talking about. But yeah, I mean, I think the stats speak for itself, right? Great speed, good armor, and can definitely defend itself very well. Especially in team games, very good. In one versus ones, sees play as well, not rarely, and for frontline zones, of course. And of course, there's strategies where, for example, on held in a very small place or something, if you get the starting side that has a town in the starting zone, you might want to start with the T80 UK as like your second CV and just park it into your opponent's 2-pointer and only get the second CV for your own 2-pointer later on, right? There's some funny strats you can do with this, right? Opening with the T80 UK in 1 versus 1s as well. Besides it being a strong unit, it's also just a fun unit because it can open up quite some strategies. I find it very enjoyable. CV infantry, pretty basic. One thing of note, of course, and we'll get to that. I guess we don't, because in the deck building you don't see the transport helicopters. In general, again, unless you're playing like Cat C or something where you don't get them. Oh, well, I guess Cat C you even get the MT and the K-29TB as well, right? By far the two best helicopters to choose from, unless all you care about is it just being a helicopter and speed and armament for some reason are irrelevant to you. Basically, always go for the MTV and the K or the K-29TB. You pay basically 25 points minimum already, and the S5Ms, while they did get buffed a bit with the Italy patch, are significantly inferior to the S13s, right? The S13s have more range, more accuracy. Obviously, this is a bit lower amount, and a lot more HE, AOE, suppression, right? Obviously lower the fire, but it's more than made up by the extra accuracy HE, right? And you still have like basically 2/3 of the ammo while having 4 times the HE, double the accuracy, an additional range step, and essentially extra accuracy if you take into account that you have a higher AoE, higher splash, so even if you quote unquote miss, there's a very high chance you still deal quite some damage, right? It's just so much more effective. You get an NSVT, while it's not a huge deal, not completely irrelevant either, especially because 50 cal is actually kind of okay. It's not like a 7.62 millimeter MG. And one front, one side armor, which again, not a huge deal, but it does provide significant protection against small arms. I.e., if you fly over an infantry squad and it shoots you in front or the side, it barely deals any damage. Which is one of the neat things about a K-29. It also has one rear armor. Now, if you've ever flown a helicopter over like elite forces, right, they don't have stingers or something, you might have noticed that because of stunning and panicking, your helicopter starts 360ing like all the time and gets stunned and can't do anything, which then leads to you getting shot into the rear and then taking a lot of damage suddenly. With the K-29TB or like K-50 or K-52, which I believe also have one rear armor, this doesn't really happen. That said, you still can get crit, right? You're not invincible, but it is actually, for these scenarios, actually a quite significant survivability boost. And of course, similar to MTV, the armament on the K-29 is quite good, right? You have 2 HE rockets, which same range, but still extra accuracy, double the HE, lots of rockets as well. Yeah. S5 rockets they have pretty much nothing going for them. And since you're already paying 25 points, 10 extra points isn't huge. And usually your helicopter squads, it's not like a 10-point squad and a 5-pointer that you spam 20 out throughout the entire game. You buy them individually. You usually have higher end squads anyway, so their base cost is higher, which means that suddenly you're looking at a 45-point versus 55-point squad that is 8 per card or something. So, the extra 10 points from the M8T to the MTV, not that huge. And while we're here, I mean, I have it open, right? I haven't even used it. I might as well. Let me show you in numbers the difference. This is, of course, radius, right? So the actual area, it's like, gotta like calculate it yourself, but it's double the radius doesn't mean double the area. It's like, I don't know, quadruple the area or something. Either way, S5M versus S13, right? Splash rate is 21 versus 46 for the high explosive, right? It's more than double the radius, which then, again, is a lot more than double the area. I think, but I think I got my point across, right? All right. Helicopter CV, I hope I don't need to mention. The problem is just you can't hide them, right? Very good optics and such is all fun and games. You can't put them in forests. You can put them in towns, but they only get hidden there because the towns just block line of sight, right? So, yeah, that's just the main disadvantage. If you could land them in forests, that'd still probably not be great, because if you want to put one of those at the front line, you get spotted miles away. You can even get shot down very easily, and you have to fly there, right? You can't land and then crawl forward like, if you unloaded an infantry CV that's coming from a helicopter. So even if that were the case, they'd be useless. They should probably just be less than 100 points. I do think that it's important that CVs are expensive, but I think something like this maybe should just be like 70 points or something like that. I don't know. But then again, who knows? This might open up some cheeses for like 10v10s or team games or something, where you just set like 3 of those to capture a secondary spawn from the opponent on the side and just for a few seconds capture it and then manage to spawn. So I don't know. Maybe there's some stuff going on with that, but there's just nothing going on for them. UAZ is a UAZ. It's a cheap CV. It's decently fast, but 5 HP, no armor. Yeah. If you really need something like a CV that is high availability per card, this is the option to go for. I can't recommend it, but sometimes even I use cheap CVs, right? Because you need so many other things in the deck, and you still need a reasonable number of CVs that if this is the only option, you know, it's not like you automatically have like a 20% lower chance to win the game if you use cheap CVs, but I have a personal disdain for them. BRDM, if you want a somewhat survivable CV that is fast, right? It's 4 per card now. Offers 1 armor or run, which is the huge deal, but 10 HP. Also amphibious. And then a BTR 70 gives 2 front armor and a KPVT. Not quite worth it, honestly. If it had 2 side armor, yes. But KPVT is not that big of a deal, and 2 front armor doesn't do that much. 2 side armor would help a lot. MTPLB. I know you can see it on the left there, but I don't think that's very important. MTPLB. I mean, there's one on Blue 4 as well, or are there 2? I think France has one, the AMX-13 tracked supply truck. I mean, the AMX-13 or the AMX PRI or whatever it's called, it has like 3 front armor and 2 side armor, which is actually quite neat. This is just 1 around armor, but 10 HP. Usually you only get 10 HP on 30 point supply trucks. Like even the 20 point ones, it only has 5, and they all have 0 armor. It's honestly not that much slower, I reckon, than normal 10-point supply trucks, because this probably has a much lower off-road speed penalty and presumably uses the same movement type as a... You know what, we might as well check, right? As a normal MTLB. I think, is it here? Yeah, it has the same moving type. Which basically, the moving types, I believe, if I remember correctly, determine how big of a penalty you get when you go off-road or through forests and such. And 10-point supply trucks get quite the big penalty. And they have a bad base off-road speed already. So, I mean, this might be faster, but you're probably still better off just going for the 20-point supply truck. But I don't think I need to tell you too much about supply. And of course, helicopters. Infantry. Go on a Strelky base. Got 2 buffs in the post-mortem wargame world. What is the post-mortem wargame world? It's basically 2017, in my mind at least, 2017 onwards, where at the end of 2016, like 30th December or something, we got the presumed the very last patch. Then in 21, we got South Africa, and in 24, we got Italy. I think in South Africa, they got their BT... Wait, did they get a buff in South Africa? Well, in Italy, the BTR 60 PB got to 10 points. In South Africa, they might have gotten from 20 to 15 points. Ugh. Either way, you, at least since Italy, you can get them in a 25-point package. They're okay. They're not like groundbreaking. They're kind of like between Light Rifleman and the Light Rifleman 90s, right? Don't quite have the range of Light Rifleman 90s, but they have more AP and accuracy than base Light Rifleman. Primary basic MG. BTR 60 PB is a good 10-pointer. It's not the best, but I guess it depends on what you're looking for. Best for like survivability would be like a ASLEV, I think. The 2 front, 2 side, and the 50 cal, or the XA186NO. That used to have 3 front, 3 side. Now it's 2 front, 2 side. But it has a KBVT which, when spammed and in close quarters, not irrelevant. You probably would prefer 2 front, 2 side with the 50 cal, but BTR 60 PBs, ever since it got to 10 points, definitely up there with the, let's say, upper echelon of 10-point APCs. Or you can spam them with MD. If you want like a decently cheap MTV, That's also an option because it gives you a solid infantry squad that it's just a decently, it's like a good squad we have just around here and there, right? It's not like when strike it individually, it doesn't really do much. This thing on flanks in the town could be pretty solid to defend against like light vehicles trying to sneak through or something like that at decent range. So it's a good option for if you have to assault in an infantry type, of course, to get a cheap MTV. Wouldn't really recommend it in either of the Hinds, because Hinds you probably want to be very aggressive with. For one, you probably would prefer them with high veterancy, because that's when their Yak Bs, the S5Ms, and the Flighter actually start to be quite solid, although the Yak B always is. And being so expensive, you want them to really matter. And with their speed and their like self-sustainability, you probably want them to like on flanks and beyond enemy lines and stuff like that. Is what I think, at least. Number 24A, of course, is just horrible. Just no. The difference is huge, right? The 3 AP and some accuracy on the Flater actually makes it a decent missile. It's not great, but especially when you get it on veteran or elite, it's not irrelevant by any means. And Yak B versus NSVT is just worse. Yak B has the AoE tag, in case you don't know, that essentially means you can shoot at anything, it doesn't matter what armor it has. So yes, it won't do a whole lot of damage to a M1A2 up front, but it can still like stun and panic it, and it will still not be irrelevant against APCs and stuff like that. Together with S5Ms at decent range, or like not like immediate close quarters, you will win against most IFVs 1v1 or maybe even 2v1, right? And the Flater will deal like 9 damage as well. Yeah, on paper the MR24D looks like it has very weak weaponry, but together, and given that you probably would run it on veteran or elite, it's no slouch at all. Gornos 90, just give me all that AP. I think they're situationally like amazing, and in other situations just horrible. I would probably they're by no means bad, right? It's just hard to commit to them, or like to commit to a deck slot for them when you're playing ranked, because you obviously don't know what map you're getting. With the range, and if you're putting them in a town that has a lot of open space around it, you just get outranged by a ton of fire support, and then you don't really do much. Now, on other maps or on other strategies or team game maps, it might be like very important towns that have like this, like that are perfect for this range, where fire support is gonna struggle to get in range, like to outrange these guys because of line of sight and such. As a result, like the type of unit that if you're playing a team game or you're playing a tournament match or like a match where you see the map beforehand and you can adjust your deck, might be great for that. For example, I wouldn't really use them on Mudfight if I were to know that I'm playing Mudfight, but I might use them on something like Hell. Probably Hell. You can still get away with it with trying to helicopter land depending on what deck you're playing against. I'm thinking of the 2 town slots right next to the bridge on the 1/1 pointer. That would be, for example, maybe even Hell. But yeah, and of course the quote unquote issue is you only get them in helicopters, so it's quite you have to commit to like quite some cost. More Skya got a 5-point price buff. It's still hard to like really fit them in, but if you needed like an all-around squad that is like decently efficient at town grinding, that would be a choice. Like they have decent MG, they're 15 men. Did you even get a 5-pointer or a decent 10-pointer? And their shock, of course. Yeah, they'd be alright for that. Still, you probably are not going to see them or use them, but because if you know the map beforehand and you're playing on Wanzen or something and you need town grinders, you're probably gonna use Spetsnaz or maybe even Saperi. Yeah, they're by no means bad, but it's just a hard fit. With Skya 90s, they're like an okay all-round infantry squad. I think they're a bit underrated. They do struggle, of course, against heavier vehicles in force, which makes them not so all-roundy. But they will in force, of course, especially, still very much deal with most IFVs, right? 17 armor is gonna one-shot up to 3 armor. Sorry, 17 AP. They get a PTR 90 and ATA, which is really good. Both very, very strong transports. Um, yeah, I sometimes I like to run them with a BTR 90. It's a decent card to get 8 BTR 90s as opposed to like 4 on your Spets and Screw. So that is nice. Monostrike base, the squad itself is decent, right? For 10-point infantry, 10 RPG 7 is arguably the best quote unquote free anti-tank weapon you get. By free, I mean you don't have to pay a premium, right? Something like a Panzerfaust 3 or something, or an Apilas. You have to pay a premium, right? Like Apilas infantry, line infantry is 15 points. Apilas shock infantry is 25 points. Whereas in RPG 7, you don't have to pay a premium. It's a very good anti-tank weapon to have on line infantry. Their main issue is just, well, like the biggest weakness and the biggest gap in the Soviet deck, and a gap that is good that is there, because otherwise it would actually be a ridiculous deck, is the fact that their 5-pointer is just very basic. 1 armor, small MG, not particularly fast, not particularly slow, but incredibly basic. This doesn't make like Monostrike and a 5-pointer an inherently bad card. It just makes them, out of all like line infantry, or like out of a lot of line infantry, one of the worst for just soaking damage, because the 5-pointer is barely gonna soak any damage, and you don't have access to reservists either, right? Some decks that only have like a 1 armored 5-pointer at least have like a 5-point reservist squad with the 5-pointer, right? So for 2 squads of these, you get 3 reservists, which is double the HP and an extra transport to shoot at. You still see it being run simply because having access to some kind of cheap meat shield is good. You could also run like, sometimes you just use him to like get a cheap BMP2 out, right? BMP3 exists, of course, but BMP2 still is like the 23 AP, 4 armor as well. Yeah. Motorstrike 90. Infamous for missing their AT weapon all the time. You know what? This is annoying me. Let me actually turn this off. We don't need this right now. Kind of like, especially like Motorstrike 90, infamous for missing this, but it hits like a truck. Obviously, right? It's not an Apilas 9, Apilas, right? Panteria di Linea 90 are kind of power creeping line infantry, but it's a whole different discussion. That said, now you have access to the BTR 90. If you want the cheapest BTR 90 you can get, this is the one. It's still 45 points, which is why, honestly, I personally just paid the 10 extra points to get more Sky Epirota 90. But still, if you want like and 12 per card, like just lots of BTR 90s, that would be the way to go. Or BTR 88 for that matter. You now get BMP3 as well, which is solid. It's quite the cost for an IFV that I find it awkward. I find it a bit awkward. It doesn't have like a staying power of a Marder 2 or CV90 in my opinion. The autocannon doesn't quite have that impact. Doesn't quite have the survivability. Although 5 front armor is not nothing. In case you don't know, it cannot fire autocannon and HE gun at the same time. So you will actually want to turn off the 2A70 at close ranges to make sure it uses the autocannon, which has a higher DPS. Arcan, of course, is very nice. And it's not like the 2A70 is useless by any means. It allows you to shell at towns and such at pretty safe distance. Yeah. It's a good IFE, but obviously it's quite expensive. It is relatively niche. It's not as versatile as many other IFVs because it really is kind of hampered into that like long range support. Mainly Arcan. It's mainly used as an Arcan carrier, and the 2A72 is basically like a backup or situationally used weapon, right? So if you put this in, you're basically putting in a card of an ATGM carrier in your infantry tab, which is again quite the cost. Especially because you have so many other ATGM carriers in Soviets. Yeah. ATGM infantry, they're all good, right? First and foremost, they're all good. Although if you go for Conquerors, you're probably just gonna go for Conquerors M. That's like Conquerors in general is just a decent ATGM, like a very solid ATGM squad. Reasonable availability of 8.6 base, in this case 9.7 because of the 10% availability bonus. Good range, decent accuracy and AP. It's just a decent ATGM infantry. Factoria, incredibly good for spamming. You can either spam them with the BTRT, or you can spam them with the Scratch It, which gives like lots of like either just fire support. Of course, it lacks the range of an IFV, but it has crazy good like burst against honestly anything grounded. Stuns extremely well if it doesn't kill, or just spread it around to make sure you don't get flooded or like stuck around by helicopter. Especially one of the I mean, obviously it depends on the situation, right? But it is certainly up there, up top, S tier kind of IFV. Honestly, obviously, right? It's gonna lose against Mario 2s, but then again, it's also 15 points, and it doesn't exactly fill the same role. You can't say there's like it's like a one IFV is or a one transport is the absolute best, situations and all that, but it is certainly up there in like when it comes to the best IFVs in the game, in my opinion, at the very least. Yeah, it will also just very often deal like significant damage to planes. Sometimes even enough that an Osa can just one-shot it afterwards with 7 HE without having to crit. Or if you use something like a book, it also only needs to deal 1 damage, right? And it very often will. And with having like a lot of them around, you will have a lot of coverage. Also, a good option to get cheap MTVs. And just like Gornos, right? Having a Factoria around, always good. Even a single Factoria can have quite an impact. So, yeah, another very good option to get cheap MTVs. Could also spend them with a BTRD robot, which is also fun, but not, in my opinion, not nearly as impactful as a Scratch It, but by no means bad either. Similar things, of course, basically go for the Conquest and Conquest M, but then, of course, with the base cost of the Infantry squad being 10 points more and having lower availability, the spam of these IFVs becomes less, but it doesn't mean that it's a bad card, right? Having a robot around or having a Scratch It around, even if it's a single one, is by no means useless. Iglas kind of follow the same rule. I'm kind of an Igla enjoyer over Igla N. Get the same availability, and for 5 points less, you also get 2 extra per card. The extra HE does not really matter that much for Red 4, right? Blue 4 is a different story, but for Red 4, it's not that big of a deal. Because so many of your support, like Sam's, deal more than 5 damage, right? All the Osas, 7 damage. Straton M, 6 damage. Books, etc., of course, 9 damage. Tunguska Missile, 7 damage, right? And Osas are probably the most common SAMs for Soviets, and followed by Books. So 5 versus 4, not a big deal. Most helicopters have less than 10 HP, except for Heinz, really. Apaches have 8, Tigers have 8, Lynxes have 6, Panthers have 6, MI8s have 8, right? A lot of them have 8 or 6, a 6, right? And having just, especially if you also try to spam them or something, 9 versus 7 is not irrelevant. And if you're playing unspec, although these are prototyped, 8 versus 6, right? Yeah, but that does, of course, it's a personal thing. At the same time, it probably doesn't really matter that much. 5 points on like a 7 or 9 per card squad, not a huge deal. And it is relatively rare that you're gonna call in more than 7. But then again, you could also upvet these and get the same per card as these, right? 7 versus 4, right? 7 upvetted versus 4 upvetted here. That is suddenly a bigger difference, dude. It's common to call in more than 4 man pads, right? More than 7, maybe not so much. And then suddenly you have like 7 on let me open up the vet table. 55% on trained is 60, and on hardened it's 65. So you could also argue you're trading 5% of accuracy for 1 HE. I'd rather get a 5% more accuracy. Strela 3, of course. Don't bother. Saperi versus Saperi 85. 95% of the time you see those squads, it is, and I think most of you know, because of the BTRT, incredibly good IFV. It is very specialized, of course, with its grenade launcher and 50 cal, basically just anti-infantry, although it's by no means useless against 5-pointers and such. But 13 armor, medium optics is kind of neat as well, but 13 armor, of course, and 5-side armor, incredibly tanky, just infantry GTFO in force for an incredibly good price. Kind of a must take, just because it's so good. not like Soviets really lack in terms of fire support. Even the Scratchet is incredibly good in forests. It's just so strong that yeah, must take. And you always see them with Saperi because Saperi have 10 HP, so they can tank better for the BTRT, right? If there's an infantry squad with the Apilas or something, you want them to engage the Saperi first, so they start using their MG. And because you can't use MG and a tank weapon at the same time, the BTRT rolls up and immediately fires, and before the opponent can react, the squad is already stunned or dead. And yes, Saperi 85 just have 5 HP, so they die faster. If you want to use them for the squad itself, which is by no means bad, it's still just a flamer squad, which it's just a flamer squad, but it has its role. Then you have BTRD available, which is a very good 5-pointer, or just splash it or like a BTR 60 PP or 70, And yeah, if even like, honestly for any scenario, I'd rather use the Saperi over the Saperi 85, because unlike for example the M202 Flash used by US, this is just straight up 10 RPM. You shoot, you reload for 6 seconds. You shoot, you reload for 6 seconds. There's no burst magazine or whatever on these squads, so they're not as good as these counterparts of other nations. Spetsnaz, yeah, like highly specialized, of course. I mean, what can I say, right? They delete infantry, but they just get killed by 2 5-pointers with 2 armor, right? So it's a very either they Shrek or get Shrek kind of unit. Hard to fit into like a ranked deck because of how specialized they are. If you can fit them in, or like if you don't mind essentially running on some maps just 4 cards of infantry, it's fine, of course. Yeah. What can I say? They're just town fighters. And sometimes forest fighters, but the thing is, when you're playing Soviets and you're fighting in forests, you're sending in BTRTs and such. You're not gonna send in Spetsnaz, because in forests there can also be enemy vehicles, of course. So they're basically pure town fighters for that reason. But yeah, if you know beforehand you're gonna fight in a town, good choice, of course. If you're playing ranked, just be aware that on some maps or some matchups, you might never get to really use them, right? If that's not a problem for your playstyle or your deck, that's of course good. Then by all means, put them in. Otherwise, yeah. VDV. The base ones you don't really see outside of Airborne, in which case they're actually kind of good. Like you can get them on Elite, you can get them in a grid 5-pointer, make them for good, like decent semi-spam infantry. They're 20 points, of course, for only 10 men, but they have a 875 meters range AT weapon, which is neat. Only 15 AP, of course, but good accuracy, so, the BMD line, BMD 3 and 2 are pretty solid. Keep in mind, though, for like a relatively expensive IV, only 2 armor, right? They're airdroppable, right? They're pretty light. 2 armor isn't too great, so make sure to keep them at a distance. They're not great in like IV versus IV autocannon duels, unless you guys catch them off guard or they're already panicked and such, of course. So be aware of them. Both, like I said, BMD 3 and 2 are pretty solid. Even 1P is good, like a Conqueror's Carrier. Conqueror's Carriers are good. BMD 1, not so great. But, in Airborne, it's too front to side, but then you can also just get like BTRDs. BDV 90, of course, absolutely goated. Amazing shock infantry. Yeah, just like 875, 24 AP, 70% accuracy. Dang, man. Yeah, they just delete vehicles, of course, at very good range and accuracy and consistency as a result. What not like. The only downside they have is they have no wheel transport, but they have a very good 5-pointer, a very good IV uniform to scratch it, very good like quote unquote proper IV uniform of the BMT3, or very good might be a stretch, but a good, and a good helicopter in the form of the MTV, right? Very often you see 2 cards of them. Keep in mind though, the Scratchet got a slight availability penalty. Alright, we're 34 minutes in already. Oh boy. Support. Bostica. Kind of the counterpart of the M109. 6 HE only. But of course, I'm not sure if I mentioned this last time, right? There's of course no unit to compare this here, but difference on... There's like mortars and there's right? Mortars and self-propelled artillery. That's a very important thing you need to know in case you don't already. And I'm actually going to showcase this on a non-Soviet unit because said counterpart doesn't exist. Let's take a look at a Nona. 60 point doesn't really matter, but mortar calibers or AGs are standardized, right? So this is the same. The Nona has the same like shell damage, whatever, as the German HS-30, for example. And compare this to the Soviet Priest, which also is 5 HE and is also 120 millimeter. Why? The Nona is a mortar, the Priest is a self-propelled artillery. While what I'm saying is the 5 HE on a mortar is not the same as 5 HE on a self-propelled artillery, and by extension, the difference between the 5 HE on a Nona and the 6 HE on a Gvostica is significantly bigger than you might think. And so let's take a look at the Priest, which is also 5 HE. Not in the M2. Oh no, M2 is actually correct. Look at this. Splash radius of the upper splash radius is of the actual damage, lower is of the suppression, right? Suppression splash radius, again, not area, this is radius. So double the radius is a lot more than double the area. It's not that big for the suppression. Okay. In fact, the Nona is even high suppression. But look at the damage radius, right? It's not quite double, but it's like 80% extra, which is quite big, right? So same for the Gvostica as a result. The splash radius of the damage is more than double, with one extra AG as well. So that is some very important thing to keep in mind when you compare like mortars and self-propelled artillery. Mortars are, of course, still that it's not like they don't have the advantages, right? Look at the aim time, right? We have 8 seconds versus 25 seconds. 9 minutes, 9 average rate of fire per minute versus 5.14, right? So it's not like mortars are inherently worse or whatever, right? But this thing with the AG is just something very, very important that is dear to my heart. Because sometimes I think people miss the point when they use the Priest or the M108 over 5 HE mortars. So, Gvostica. Kind of like an M109, has a 25-second aim time, not 30, which is neat. Very good salvo length of 12, which means obviously salvo length. It has a 10-second shot reload, which isn't great, right? 10 seconds in between each shot is not great, but 12-second salvo length means long salvo. Like if all you care about, and this is what you should use the Gvostica for, is constant bombardment of an area. Long salvo length is good because it means you have to use the salvo reload of 30 seconds a lot less often, right? And salvo reload of 30 seconds is universal. If you have a 12 salvo, if you have a salvo length of 12 or a salvo length of 3, you still have to reload for 30 seconds after your salvo, right? Which is why long salvo length is very, very good for, well, in general, but yeah. Yeah, it's good for that. Akatsiya is more like an M109 because it has the 7-inch E and it's also less accurate, right? It's the same dispersion as on the M109. But I think it has what's a salvo length of 10 still, but shot reload of 12. Yeah. They're relatively light on the supply per cost though. So you can keep firing and keep firing and keep firing. There's also the 75-point Akatsiya, which is basically the same, but just more accurate, right? A bit more range. For what they do, they're fine. They're all fine. Mista, of course, has a 10-second aim time. It's not as accurate as like a Ace 90 or a SSR. As you can see, is it dispersion here? There it is, dispersion 200 versus 250. But it also means it's cheaper on supply. So, yeah. It has a decent fire rate as well. Very similar to the SSR, except one less shot in the salvo. And of course, a 10-second aim time, which is very, very good. So, yeah. Gion and Malka, they're like M110s, right? Very low rate of fire, very high damage. Malka has a bit more oomph. Another thing to point out, though. Where's the peon? There it is. They have a shot reload of 15 seconds, and the Malka has a salvo length of 8, which means that only after 8 shots it has to go through the 30-second reload time. So if you want to keep a small area more or less constantly bombarded, like a town block or something, or the center town in Mudfight, let me put it this way: the 8-shot salvo length is not huge, and if you don't pay attention, can be a hindrance, because that means it's gonna, if you end up using the entire salvo, it's obviously gonna sit there longer until it's done. So if you shift queue your artillery between firing, right, you just give them a fire command and shift queue move, it's only gonna move after like 105 seconds after the first shot, whereas the peon is gonna do it after 45 seconds. Meaning, if you don't pay a lot of attention, you're actually opening up yourself to more counter battery, which is by no means irrelevant. But at the same time, if you care about somewhat constant bombardment, the extra salvo length is kind of neat. Of course, it's also more accurate. The OSAs, nothing special, I think, in terms of like hidden stats here. OSAs have 7 HE, so with a critical hit, they will pretty much always one-shot 10 HP planes that don't have 2 armor, or that aren't getting hit at the 2 armor part. They're all good. AK and AKM are the... Okay, this is the anti-helo specialist, this is the anti-plane specialist, and this is the all-rounder. That being said, the all-rounder is still best at everything compared to the others. It has the same range as the OSA, but with a lot more accuracy, and more range than the AK, plus with a bit more accuracy. But of course, there's a cost difference, right? And the base OSA doesn't have a radar. Base OSA, of course, only is 35% accuracy, but a lot of range on wheels with 7 HE. It's nothing to slouch at. It's just, if that's like your only defense against helicopters, yeah, like at least get 2 of them, or mainly use them on a flank, or like as like in support with your scratches or something, right? Don't bank your entire or like don't take your entire opener from helicopters with like 1 OSA, okay? It will disappoint you. That said, it will also surprise you massively. It will just randomly one-shot crit a plane flying over it with like a 5% chance or something like that, right? Yeah. And it's a very fun unit, but it can also be a very frustrating unit, because it's, of course, very bad in terms of base accuracy. But the stats it offers, besides the accuracy for its price, are, of course, amazing. Also, AK, very solid. Like, for 45 points, you get acceptable range versus planes, good accuracy, and 7 HE, which is really neat, at very on wheels. 7 per card upwetted, quite solid. You have to be a bit close to the front line, but with the speed and on wheels and such, you can do that. And with the price, it's not that big of a deal if you end up losing one. It's not that great versus helicopters, but that's usually what you have the scratches for. Because the scratches you can put even further forward, because you don't care too much about them, and they can also tank artillery a bit better, etc., etc. AKM is just your all-rounder. It's basically a wheeled Roland with like extra HE, but you lose a bit of like 10% accuracy. But of course, unlike a Roland, you only have to reload after firing 6 shots, which is, especially versus helicopters, quite a big deal. Let's say one-shot planes, of course. Core is the also like Rolandified, I guess. Now tracked, it's essentially the same missile, right? For wargame purposes. Still 7 HE, very good versus helicopters now, better versus planes, and extra accuracy, and it's tracked. You don't see that often these days, but it's like probably the most most high-end all-around SAM in the game, I'd argue, right? It has a lot of ammo, it has very good range versus helicopters, good, very solid range versus planes, good accuracy, 7 HE, speed. Only 1 armor isn't great, but it has 10 HP. Yeah, it's just incredibly versatile. Book is just... It's no real reason to use the book when you for 15 points you get the book M1, right? The accuracy alone is worth 15 points, okay? It's just huge. Huge. And if you're using if you're playing CATC for some reason, just use the OSAS, okay? Like for 5 points, you get 700 meters range versus planes. Alright. But only 4 missiles, you're slow, and you don't have the range versus helicopters, and you have pure missiles. You're not all roundy. It's just There's no real reason to go for the book. BM21 Grad. It's kind of okay these days, but practically speaking, you have the Euro again. Arguably the best MLRS, like HE MLRS at the very least, in the game. Probably, I mean, on average, you probably would rather have a Plowman. Plowman is just probably the most versatile and best one in the game. But what the Plowman can't really do is like delay openings. Yeah, it's a better M270, right? The M270 is basically the same. It has technically better HE and suppression, but 16 rockets versus 12, and lower time between the rockets as well. Yeah, it's just incredibly good. Stuns, damages, kills, and better range set than the M270 as well. The M270 sometimes struggles with the minimum range with its 42 kilometers. The Eurogun a lot less because lower maximum range also means lower minimum range. Merge is a big bad boy of cluster MLRS, of course. I wouldn't really recommend using this in 1v1s if you're really tryharding. Doesn't mean it's useless, but hard to justify. The team game is quite strong because the team games you see a lot more heavy tanks. Especially when you're thinking of like the central point zone of Bloody Ridge, right? It's just a feast for the Smirch. So almost kind of a must take for team games, if you will. Honestly. Thriller 1M, it used to be played in 1v1s every now and then because it's a cheap wheeled AA, fine forget, perfect stabilizer. Doesn't really see usage nowadays. It's not horrible or useless, but it doesn't really do that much, honestly. Strelton M is pretty solid around, but it just doesn't see play in like really a lot of decks. I think the most played CS is probably something like Eastern Bloc or Red Form Armored / Mech. But like in Soviets, you just use like Osas and Scratchets, maybe even Tunguskas. In Entente, for example, you have the Sava. In Eastern Bloc, you for non-radar array usually rely on your LSTRs. Some people use the Strop 2 or the Sopel. It's by no means bad, it's just very, very whelming, right? It is very solid. And it's never gonna betray you. Has lots of missiles, solid range, non-radar, is fine to forget, 6 HE is neat, especially coupled with an Igla, right? There we go again, where the 4 HE is not really a hindrance. Yeah. Podnos is a 3 HE mortar. That's all I have to say, I think. Right? It's has the same sets as every other 3 HE mortar. Vasilek is, of course, very, very different. The Vasilek has its fancy, schmancy autoloader. Podnos, Vasilek. While on paper, oh, that's a PKT. I was about to say, on paper, they have the same rate of fire. That's new to me. There you go. That's much better. So shot reload 0.6 versus 2 is the first thing that should probably pop up. Subbling 5 versus 4, like it doesn't really look that different, but of course the Vasilek, if you ever use it, it's gonna fire 4 rounds in a very short burst, and then reloads for 10 seconds. Podnos fires 5 rounds, 2 seconds, 2 seconds, 2 seconds, 2 seconds. There you go. On paper, it doesn't really look that fancy. If you've ever played with it, you know the Vasilek just fires much faster. It's fun, it's neat. It's not that big of a deal for like smoking, but it can be very, very nice for like just actual fire support. Because the follow-up shots have like much higher chance to hit because it gives your opponent less time to react after the first shot lands. So, yeah, and especially now that it's only 5 points more expensive, it used to be I think 45 points. Probably not really a reason to use the Podnos anymore, because even ammo-wise, you get 100 versus 85, and probably it's actually better that it only fires 4 rounds versus 5. So if you want to smoke, 4 should probably be enough anyway. Which means you get 25 salvos instead of what's this, 17 on the Podnos. Yeah, it's neat. And it also means, of course, that if your first smoke round is a bit off target because of AoE, of course, the follow-ups are gonna arrive much faster. Yeah. Nona SVK 5HE mortars. They're actually better than normal 5HE mortars, right? They have more accuracy. Aim time I think is the same. Let me look it up. The main hindrance really is just they carry so little ammo. Let's just go like ages 30. So little ammo, so they run very quickly. Aim time is in fact the same on both. The accuracy is different, right? 150 here, 175 there, and the normal, let's say, mortars have 200 dispersion. So, yeah, if it's just the ammo, right? Ammo and cost. An HS30 is 35 points. A quote-unquote normal 550 mortar is usually 40 points. This is 50 and this is 60. And unlike the French VPM, for example, they don't have better aim time. French VPM, I think, has 2 seconds lower aim time on its HE shells. So, yeah. I mean, if you have a fob or you don't mind using your fob for your mortars, because mortars can and will drain your fob, go for it. But you're probably, if you just want like an all-round mortar for just smoke and the occasional fire support, probably better off the Vasilek. But if you want, look, don't if you like the Nona, sorry, not the Vasilek. If you like the Nona, don't let me like tell you to like die in Minecraft. It is very accurate, right? So 2 or 3 of them, if there's like infantry fires that last longer than 2 seconds, which means that you're not using individual motor strike against a 4-stack of Fallschirmjäger or something, they will kill infantry, right? The accuracy, and if you're just not using them at max range so that runs don't have to travel as far, not to be ignored for like direct fire support on the mortars, okay? Buratino, oh boy, how many changes I've witnessed. Used to be in the vehicle tab with 2 per card, and I think 120 points as well, and a significantly lower aim time. Now it's at a stat where it's probably fine. I could arguably use a small buff, but I think it's fine. Like semi-indirect fire, or sort of direct fire, if you will, like short range, huge damage, MLRS with fire after it. It stuns, it kills, it just makes you delete an entire forest. I think it's pretty self-explanatory of what it does. Just be careful that either make it fire from deep forest or smoke it off or something. It's a prime like plane target for like suicide planes or something, right? 140 points, 1 per card, incredibly impactful. And be mindful. If you really want to use this to its full effect, try to migrate a bit and use like, I'd say the ideal is probably 7 to 8 shots per salvo. So you get like essentially 4 usages out of like a full magazine. You will never need all 30 rockets. The only real thing is if you know where the enemy CV is, pretty much, or like a rough area, and there's pretty much no way you can relatively quickly kill it, and you need to kill it. Let's say it's the last 2 minutes in the game. You don't really have the units to push there or something, and you just need to kill something, or the very least stop it from like being stationary there and force it to move because of the fire. Obviously, then there's a good reason to use the entire 30 rounds, right? But if what you want to do is like weaken up or like just panic a ton of stuff in an area before you push in, 7 to 8 rockets is enough, or use 10 rockets like a third. That's almost always enough. The suppression AoE on these rockets is huge and very high, right? Ural is basically the scratch it gun on a truck. If you use scratch it, there's no reason to use this. Shellcars better users. They have incredible burst, but they have to reload their magazines very frequently. They will like they're really bad against helicopters, at least more than one. Because they will empty their entire magazine, probably kill one, but then have to reload for 10 seconds when the second one arrives. Yeah. But that said, they have incredibly high bursts, right? 0.2 seconds between the shots, incredibly high rate of fire, the highest you can get essentially on this bag. Not the only ones, of course, but one of a few. Yeah. Tunguskas, they also have 0.2 seconds between shots. If I remember correctly. Yeah, they do. Both of them, they have the same gun, right? The only difference is the missile. Keep in mind, the missile has short reload of 1 second, right? You will notice there's going to be a bit of reload time between the individual missiles, so keep that in mind. That said, the missiles, especially on the Tunguska, is incredibly good, right? And a better missile than a Crotal. Not quite Eton 90 level, especially when it comes to the helicopter range, but 7 HE again. One-shot crits 10 HP planes. It's incredibly strong, but for the problem with the Tunguska is for the price, it still has to be quite close to the front line, and with only 2 front and 1 side armor, it is always a bit spicy. If you could have a Tunguska with just a gun or just the missiles, you'd see those a lot more. But that's just sometimes the issue with these systems in Wargame. Like, for the cost, to be effective, you need to be close, but they don't have the survivability for the cost to be really used to close, because it's very, very, well, not scary, but let's say risky. The worst offender when it comes to that is the Chinese PGC 95, which is like 70 points with 1 front armor. It's a shame. Like, such a good gun, and like Mistrals on a Spag, but 1 front armor at 70 points. Like, you have to be at the front, but then you die to one shot instantly to any like AMX 10 or something, right? And similar with the Tunguska, it has 2 front, but one side, like one AMX 10 sneaks around and relatively close to the front line, and you're dead, right? 90 points gone. That's why I can't really recommend it. In team games, it's a different story. In team games, it can't be worth it to bring this just for the missile, right? Longbow protection, and even against planes, very solid. But it's just probably better off just using the 75 point one, because then it doesn't hurt as much. Tanks, oh boy, man, Soviets have so many units. It's worse than the US deck, dude. We're always 56 minutes in, and now we're like at the tank time. Oh boy, I need a break. Alright, freshly hydrated. T-34. It's a T-34. It is heat for 15 points, which can be funny. Doesn't have the best range though. 3 HE is nice, 50 cal is good. 3 armor is nice, but only 6 RPM and 50 kmh. On paper, of course, you could just get 10 of those and one-shot any tank in the game. Doesn't work like that, of course. That's the thing with like these heat spams on paper. Sometimes it can work, right? But it's honestly pretty rare that you can like actually like heat bully a super heavy to death. Because the thing with these things is you get 12 of them, 3-4 stacks. Try to attack, move towards a tank. It's either just gonna kill you one by one in reverse, or which is very likely, or it's on top of that, right? What happens is one of them gets killed, the other ones are so close nearby they also get panicked because the one just died. Then they don't hit because they already have pretty low base accuracy, and then they panic, so the accuracy drops down to like 10 seconds. Sorry, 10%. Then they reload forever because they're panicked, will never get to follow up. Plus, your opponent will most likely have other units other than the super heavy that will also deal with your T-34s, right? So these like heat bullying down super heavies, again, it's not like it never happens, but it's not really something that you can just rely on as a general strategy. It's something that just happens in the moment if you get an opportunity. That said, it is kind of okay fire support against infantry, maybe even IFVs for the cost. Kind of, because speed and such and range is actually quite important. Because you also want to stay safe from the enemy fire support like IFVs, right? You don't want to have your 4 stack of T-34s get bullied by a single Marder 2, because you have the same range. In fact, you get outranged by the Marder 2. So, yeah. And then, of course, it doesn't do much against the Marder 2. Heat is usually actually not something you want. In the majority of cases, you rather want kinetic, because very often you will also end up traveling into forests and such, and then the kinetic will allow you to actually double tap stuff like BVPs or TH-495s, or maybe even like Marder 2s, who knows. But with 10 AP heat, you will always need 3 shots against even 3 armor, right? And yeah. PT-90 is a pity. Huh. I don't know why it's called 90. I guess it's because of the caliber. It's 1973. It's a Malutka P, which is not that slow actually, but actually kind of a reasonable gun, but it's quite slow. It's 25 points, has no MG, 2 armor, 9 AP is not a lot, and low speed and low AP does not bode well. It just does have nothing going for it. BB685, you see it every now and then. It's kind of like a flank tank, which usually the T-72A is used, but 5 armor means it doesn't immediately get killed by MX-10s or autocannons. It's basically autocannon proof at max range, except like maybe a Marder 2 or something. It has medium optics with good speed. It has okay range, but very good accuracy and rate of fire. It has an autoloader. Like it's like a pseudo unit that you use like an AMX-10 on the flank, because Soviets lack that as well. It's like the second biggest weakness, I'd say, is in the Recon tab. They don't have something like an AMX-10, AMX-13. They have the BRDM-3, which I think got a 5-point prize buff, if I'm not mistaken. But it's like a pseudo replacement for that. It's not amazing, but it's okay. Like, just don't use it at the main front line, I'd say. If it had more range, you could use it at the main front line. It's like a fire support at long range with like 3 HE and 10 RPM and the accuracy. That's okay. It's like a secondary role. But yeah, it's with the range and the lack of AP and armor, it's not gonna do much there. T55A, T55AM. I'm just gonna go like over these lines that unfortunately don't see a lot of play. I'm just gonna like go over the entire line like very briefly. Kind of an okay fire support tank or close quarters tank. Doesn't have the speed though, and bad optics is quite a hindrance compared to poor optics. It's just so blind. It just needs like a little bit, and then in like armored decks, it would actually kind of pop off. I keep trying to make use of it, but yeah. 7 armor also means it does get one shot by Chumat and spikes up front. T55 AM, too weak to actually do something against IFVs consistently on like an all-round purpose vehicle. Too expensive to use as like a fire support spam tank. AM2 kind of neat as like Bastion spam, because a Bastion is reasonably fast. And in tank decks or armor decks with the veterancy, you have pretty decent accuracy. Probably like decent as like a tech unit, I guess, against like mech decks or something on maps like Mudfight. It keep killing, like even 5-pointers is probably worth it to just stop stuff in tracks. So infantry inside either gets killed or is forced so not very early. Decent roll for that. AMV, anime music video, just extra speed, optics, armor for 5 points. Definitely worth it, honestly. Makes it a much better all-around tank as well. T62 lacks RPM or an MG to be like effective fire support vehicle. Decent armor for 20 points, but again, if you want to use a spam tank like this, either just straight up be a charioteer at 15 points with 8 RPM and 3 HE, or have like a good 50 cal. But it's not that great. OBR 75, similar story to the T55 AM. Too expensive to be like a spam fire support tank, and too weak to really being consistent like flank tank to protect against IFVs or light pushes. Doesn't have the optics for that or the RPM. Yeah. And the entire T62 line just struggles with the 6 RPM. It's hard to make them use. They don't have the speed or like the caliber or firepower to be like a spam for high AP in the forest to like burst down vehicles. You can kind of do it with the M1. Like 45 point with full range and 50 AP is actually quite good. It's the speed. If it had like 70 kmh, there's definitely some strats you could use, right? If you end up facing like a lot of medium tanks, and this had good speed, you would probably like make it work. Like in forests, like with the kinetic scaling at full range, just burst down those medium tanks and maybe lose one of those tanks in the process while killing one 90-point tank. MV1 is an Arcane carrier if you don't want to use the PMP3, or if you're playing armored and you want to make use of the veterancy. Still struggles, same with the T62M, with the other problems of the T62 line. Low speed, low RPM. Okay, now we get to basically like everything from this tank onwards, like downwards, is just solid at the very least. Many of these are good, but at the very least, these units are like solid, or let's say decent, right? T64A, 9 RPM autoloader, and here we are at the 4 HE, right? All these T64s, 72s, and 80s have the 125mm rounds, or like guns, which means a 4 HE, like a 33% extra HE compared to blue 4 tanks that aren't like a chieftain or something. That is huge. That is huge. And especially on 9 RPM, right? Suddenly you get 36 HE per minute instead of 27, right? You suddenly triple shot a unit from full HP instead of quadruple, right? 10 HP squad that is. 4G is such a big deal. Of course, generally speaking, Red 4 tanks, with some exceptions like the M84 line, of course, have lower accuracy, but they make up with higher HE and more often than an autoloader, which is very, very neat. And 9 RPM is like a very, very good threshold to have for an autoloader, because most blue 4 tanks will have 9 RPM, but if their rate of fire, morale goes down, their rate of fire drops, yours doesn't. So T64A is an okay or decent like general purpose tank. It has the armor, it has the RPM, doesn't have quite the accuracy, but 9 RPM outloaded is good, and good speed to like just be there to not get killed by IFVs, but kill them in return, right? Of course, if you're talking about like a Bradley with a TOW 2 shooting at you in max range, that's a different story. Yeah. T64B is like a pretty solid workhorse tank. It does struggle a bit with its gun. Not having full range is annoying. Not having medium optics can also be quite annoying for a workhorse tank. But at the same time, you have a 9 RPM autoloader again. You have a Cobra that is even stabilized. Not a huge shield, but can be neat. You have 13 front armor for 65 points. It's quite a solid workhorse tank. It's just that at long ranges you might struggle against tanks, but that's also kind of where the Cobra comes in, right? And then with 20 armor against tanks in similar price range, 20 AP, you will deal quite some damage. And of course, there's always the gun trick. His T64BM is kind of like a 2A1. Same armor, same AP, same RPM, same range, same speed, I'm pretty sure, medium optics. You lose a bit of accuracy and stabilizer, but again, you gain a Cobra. Of course, sometimes I hear people say, oh, paying 5 points or 10 points for a Cobra on a tank that already costs 100 points or 110 points. Who cares about that? It's not gonna deal any damage to like enemy super heavies or something. Yeah, sure. Maybe it only deals 1 damage, but consider this. Maybe you're gonna finish off a 1 HP tank that is trying to retreat, although admittedly that is probably rather rare. You will always be a threat at longer distances of tanks that try to rotate as like to another side of the map. And then there's the entire thing of, it's not like you're always gonna go up against, or only gonna go up against tanks of similar cost or higher cost, right? What about lower tank spam? What about AA that is trying to run away after you push through, right? That Cobra, even if it is not that relevant against tanks at the same price range or upwards, or a sphere on a T72 BU slash 90 is the biggest thing, right? You can get the BU for 175 or the T90 for 170. The sphere is such a big upgrade. It gives you so much versatility. Yes, again, in like a straight up tank, super heavy versus super heavy fight, it is not very relevant. Not irrelevant, but not that big of a deal. But in other situations, it gives you so much potential value, right? And that basically on every tank, an ATGM for 5 or 10 points, a semi-decent ATGM for 5 or 10 points, I'm not talking about base minute gas, is so nice to have. Of course, if you want something like, if you just want like a relatively cheap tank gun tank, right? Maybe and you can't get it. I can understand in certain situations it might be annoying. Like maybe you want like a T64B, but without a Cobra and 10 points less or something like that, right? That would be very valuable to the deck. Sure, I can understand these situations or these point of views, but sometimes I feel like people just try to, for some reason, badmouth their favorite tank or like pretend that their favorite tank is bad and needs a buff because Cobras are bad or something like that. Maybe this is just a reaction to me having a neuron activation about forum posts from 10 years ago where people were complaining about that, but man. T64BV1 is basically an M1A1. For 5 points less, you have less accuracy and stabilizer, I guess. Probably a bit less speed, but you get 4 HE, an outloader. It's fine. It's fine. It's a good tank. And a BV for 10 points, you get 1 AP and an Argona. Again, it's fine. It's great even. All 4 of these tanks are good. These are kind of like an M1A1 kind of tank. This is like your Leopard 2A1 tank. If you want like an analog for Blue 4. Yeah, very good. Very good tank. Line, really. T64A out of T64A and base T72, definitely the 2 weakest tanks out of this entire bunch. And this T72 is kind of like a T64A, right? It's not gonna get rolled over by pretty much any IFV. It's not gonna like be too great defensively though because of poor optics, but at the same time, an AMX 10 at max range shooting it is gonna shoot it for a bit, so you should have enough time to react and retreat or something. Yeah. 4G again, of course. 72s until we get to the B1, of course, only 700 RPM. Keep that in mind. And the T72A is probably the most used like flank tank, if you will, in Soviets. Medium optics, 13 armor, decent range and accuracy. What for 55 points is just very good value. Very good value. Excuse me. Very versatile. And if you end up having to use it at the front line, it has at least a decent enough range and such that you can use it as like a relatively long range, like fire support and such. B1 is like your other option for like your medium tank. If the BM is T64 BM is a bit expensive, you lose on RPM and 1 front armor, but you're also 15 points cheaper, and you get 4 top armor. If laser guided bombs or clusters for some reason are an issue for you, the B1 is a good option, or the B rather. For 5 points more, but also 1 less per card. Keep that in mind. You get a free sphere. No stabilizer unlike the C64s. But like for 90 points, you already get the 22 AP variant, where on the T64 you have to go for the BV. So that's neat. OBR 87, kind of like a Challenger-ish kind of tank, Challenger 1-ish. Like pretty good armor for the price. Compare this. You get 18 armor now instead of 17. You have better speed. You get a sphere. You lose RPM though in 1 AP. You trade 1 AP and 1 RPM. And then, sorry, you trade these, like you lose 1 AP, you gain 1 front armor. You lose 1 RPM, but you gain the sphere. You get a bit of stable speed, but you also get side armor and top armor. Again, if there's got bombs or something, an issue, the OPR is also a good option. 89 is basically like an M1A1 HA, same armor, same AP as the HA, sorry. 8 RPM, of course, but again, they're all auto-loaded, which somewhat make up for having 1 less RPM. It's not that big of a deal, admittedly, at least for like these kind of tanks, because the thing is, when you're panicked and such, sure, your RPM doesn't go down, and not rarely that having the autoloader then is still very nice, because you can, like an infantry or something, at least keep shooting. But in like tank v tank engagements, where you often like going in and out of line of sight, being panicked still for autoloader tanks will massively increase the aim time, so you still want to be very careful when fighting enemy tanks and such. But yeah, the OBR is like an HA. It's a very good like all-around heavy tank. It's not gonna be that great at punching up. It does have the best AP for its price, but then again, it's very good at punching down because of its very high armor value, right? So it's like a what's it called? Gatekeeper, right? For like you wanna go up to the super heavies first, you have to pass me, kind of deal, right? It's very good at that. Like very good against like mech decks and such. I like it. And the BU, of course, is your super heavy. Right now it has 9 RPM. Still outloaded, of course. Good speed, good accuracy, good armor, good AP, sphere. Not the best stabilizer. The stabilizer is really the biggest downside on this. Either the stabilizer or only having only 65. You'd really rather have 70 or even more if you could on the tank, but compared to the T80UM, which is its counterpart in its own deck, I suppose, it does have very good autonomy though. T80 base, very good in armor decks, like a very good like CQC tank. 13 RPM and 13 armor, 9 RPM with 16 AP and full range, with 70k mage off-road speed, just make it so good at hunting down tanks and forests, right? It's AP scaling. 13 armor means it doesn't get one-shot by kinetic. 70k mage means it's barely gonna get outsped by any tank, outmaneuvered, if you will. Very good for that. It is gonna struggle at long ranges. It can't spot for itself, but it has some downsides somewhere. TADB is not a good option for like a workhorse tank. It's not quite like a 2A1 level, right? It struggles with the AP and the armor, but it's 75 points, still 9 RPM, good speed, better accuracy and such, so it's better at long ranges, and of course it gets a Cobra. The ADVV is kind of like a middle ground between the BM and the BV. It has the Cobra, but it has a bit more armor than the BM. Same gun basically, or like same gun stats. Doesn't quite have the AP on the BV, but the same armor. Also only has 3 top armor as well, but it's a bit faster. You don't really see that often, but not because it's inherently bad. There's just like 4 choices, like even like 5 choices in this price range, right? You have the 64 BM, 64 BV1, 64 BV, OBR 87, and the 80 BV, right? All in this price range. That's the thing with Soviet tanks, right? All the T64, T72s, and 80s, they're all worthwhile. And sometimes the differences are a bit superficial, but there's still quite some noticeable differences for most of them. The ADA is a tank you mainly see in armored because of its missile. Right, you get an armored on elite and you have to very high accuracy, very long range, fast missile, even with stabilizer, 22 AP, about 100 points, and then no medium optics, but 100 points is still 18 AP, 6 in armor, like a 2A1, so not that bad. It's really the optics that struggle or make it struggle in like normal circumstances. The ADU, of course, kind of like the OBR9, same armor, same AP, 75 kmh though, and the reflex, and high RPM, and better like gun stats in general, but only for 50 kilometers autonomy and 3 top armor. Again, the T80 struggles against laser guided bombs and clusters. T72 line not so much, from the B onwards at least. That is something to keep in mind. It's not as important these days because laser guided bombs don't have like 100% accuracy anymore. But cluster bombs are used more nowadays. But if you remember like the 2016 days or like the was it with the Israel DLC? I think it came with the Israel DLC where they made laser guided bombs not have 100% accuracy anymore, right? Because before that, the Harrier GR7, for example, or the Nighthawk, and technically the Swedish SK60B, but we're gonna leave that one out. But the Nighthawk and the GR7, I believe, were the only laser guided bomb planes back then. Japanese F1 also existed, but that wasn't that big of a deal. But the GR7 and the Nighthawk were pretty much able to, like 99% of the time, one-shot any tank with 3 top armor. And by 99% of the time, I don't mean like if they hit, I mean like 99% of the time they just perfectly hit. And 40 HE against 3 top armor kills 10 HP units. Which was, back then, huge, of course. 2A5, 3 top armor. Humarochiki, 3 top armor. Leclerc, 3 top armor. T80UM, 3 top armor, you name it. But look at that, T90S, T72BU, M1A2, Challenger 2, 4 top armor. In fact, I think back then, the T90 even had 5 top armor. I don't know when that got changed, but T90 and T72BU actually had 5 top armor back then, which was huge. And then, of course, the same goes for the medium tanks. The T72B line having 4 top armor was very, very nice. The Challenger 1 line having 4 top armor was very, very nice. Those were all, like, back then a lot more important than nowadays. It's not like they're irrelevant these days, but it's, just to give you a little history lesson. And then we have the DUM, of course. With the speed, of course, very, very, quite a fan favorite, I'd say. And then the Invar, of course, 24 AP at very long range, very, very nice. Same gun, basically, although you get a better stabilizer. You lose 1 armor, but you gain 15 kmh. It is a worthwhile trade, honestly. Or better missile, of course, as well. But the 15 kmh is very nice to have. Incredibly good. Both, to just chase down units, of course, but also just to evade and get out of line of sight. Very, very nice. Alright, I think we got most of the stuff behind us now. I think the rest should go pretty fast. BRM1K, exceptional ground optics, I can't recommend. The optics are great and all, but because it's a vehicle, you can't get close to the enemy and it's very costly. MI2, basic optics, of course, helicopter Recon, always good to have, always worth using, honestly, if you want to pick it. M8R, I can't recommend. It's clunky and doesn't do anything other than spot. Better off just getting 2 Mi2s instead of 1 Mi8R. 24K is a decent option though. Like after the opener, just be careful with it to not be too aggressive. But then after the opener, it can always be like very useful to just hunt down stuff on the flanks, or if you have decent intelligence, just hover and keep an eye over areas where AA can't get to you very safely. K52, of course, like the expensive option, and for a long time, really a main option, or still is, to have AA hero in the opener. Usually, you don't really care about the seat. You mainly want the Igla Vs and the optics. Gun is mounted like on the side here, which means it's not on the turret, so the entire helicopter has to rotate for it to fire. So the gun is not very useful. Like, not useless, but hard to make use of because it's 130-point helicopter. You don't want it to take like 5 seconds to turn around and aim, because by then maybe the AA is already there in range, right? Does have stealth though. Both of these are not very great, very expensive for very little firepower. This is actually kind of okay, but not great. Doesn't have 50 cal or anything, and it's slow. The 55 is okay, but again, no MG, so it's not very versatile. As Vedka, your basic recon option, also an option to get cheap MTVs. GRU are usually your main BTR90 users, right? They're very strong, they're very all-roundy, they're elite. You get them at high veterancy, can get them in a BTR90, very good for openers, also good for MI24Ds. That's not BMF. Important, very important thing. The Vintoris does, if you fire with the Vintoris, you're not easier to spot. In terms of like units spotting you, of course, if the enemy pays attention and sees the fire trail of the shot, right, like the visual thing, he can just fire position you, or at least roughly knows where you are. But like units will not spot you from further away if you start shooting with the Vintoris, because it's suppressed. Doesn't go for the AKS-74U, but it does go for the Vintoris. It's just a neat little thing to point out for the sniper squad here. USC is not good. This is not good. BRDM2 is fun if you can fit it in, but hard to fit in. Always, if you have nothing else to put in, you have the points left, use a BRDM2. Just, it's cheap as fuck. Good autonomy and speed. If the enemy uses cheap CVs and you sneak it around, it can easily kill it, right? For 50 points, incredibly cheap investment. Lamia, same story as a BRM1K. And the BRDM3, good all-rounder, good offensive, good defensive. What more can you ask for? Like a Hachinana, like a Lux, affordable, decent firepower, good availability. Vehicles, one of the better vehicle types in the game. ASU is kind of decent, especially since its RPM on the HE gun got fixed with, I think, the South Africa patch. Use of 6 RPM on the HE gun, I think. 2 front armor, 3 HE, 50 cal, kinetic, 3 HE, 8 RPM, unlike the T-34. It's not that fast though, so yeah. Mercury carrier is bad. Conqueror's carrier is decent. Conqueror's M carrier is also decent. Hard to fit in though. There's still only 1 armor, so 1 tank pop and they're dead. So usually you have better options, right? There's a lot of good other stuff down there. CPDUs, they're both good. Yeah, this one just has the higher rate of fire. This one is cheaper. Usually you go for the CPDU 2, because for the price of 2 of these, you can get 3 of those, right? More coverage, more units to shoot at for the enemy as well. Jados are pretty solid. Crazy autoloader. This just, it does in fact just fire every 3 seconds, right? This is not like a magazine autoloader or something like on the AMX-13. It just fires every 3 seconds with 3 HE and 50% accuracy and 2 front armor, medium optics, 70 kmh off-road speed. Yeah, just, it's neat. It's also 30 points though. Like for 2 armor in that range, it just gets murdered by AMX sense and such. But it can be very fun to use. Storm is not that great. It looks funny on paper and decent, but it has to reload every 5 seconds after shot. It's 50 points with only 1 armor and no optics and such. So again, if something comes in range, pop, it's dead. Usually you just use tanks for like ATGM carry duties, honestly. Or the BMP3. SU-122 is probably the better option compared to the ASU-85. It has lower RPM, but 4 HE, has a KBVT, and 4 front armor, right? So it's much more sturdy against autocannons. Even 5 kmh better. Norov also autoloaded, by the way, I think. It's I don't know what to think. It's not that great, right? 2 armor with an okay gun, right? It has medium optics, which is nice, but then like compared to something like this, which for 5 points less, still uses 1-step range, which is not nothing, but 3 extra armor, man, I don't know. The Northrop is just awkward. It would need to be in the Recon tab or something. Flame tanks, yeah, you can fire position with them to like block line of sight as like a pseudo smoke if you want. SPG 9 on a Jeep, it does what it looks like. Cheap anti-gem carriers are always like they're never really bad. It's always a matter of can you fit them in, right? They're usually the type of unit to fit in or put in if you're like, I have some activation points left in the vehicle tab. Sure, let's put this in, right? It's never like horrible, but it's rarely like game changing either, right? It's like every now and then you end up using them and you're like, oh yeah, having like 3 Congress M for 90 points, that just fucked up my opponent. Hell yeah, right? But then if you start using them like consistently, then like 9 of 10 times they will just get bullied by autocannons or something because you don't pay attention or you're careless or they use up or like, waste all the ammo or get mortared or whatever, right? Afghansky is like it wants to be the M163 CS so bad, but it's just it struggles. Same issue with the Biryusa and the Shilka. Like yes, the burst is good, but it has reeled after its burst for quite a long time. And that just leaves it vulnerable in the time period, right? So it's not that great. BBT is just godly. I don't think I need to tell you why. 15 armor with a grenade launcher, medium optics, and 70 kmh, and an autocannon. Grenade launcher and autocannon can fire at the same time, but not a 2A7 and a 2A72 again, right? So you want to turn this off if you're fighting in forests because this is better DPS against infantry. It will just melt infantry like there's no tomorrow. Holy. Kind of like a must take, honestly. I remember when this got buffed from like 70 to 60 points, I was going crazy. I'm like, oh, are you crazy, Eugen? I still think it wasn't necessary, but crazy good unit. Helicopters. Okay, like for heavy duty anti-tank killers, there's always the 2 options, right? The good old Aquila and the Mi-28. Aquila used to have 2975 meters range. Not anymore. There's one important thing with the Aquila, with its missiles. They fire in like semi-bursts. Missiles are for one incredibly fast, right? You also notice they have horrible stabilizer, but it's not that big of a deal. You just make sure to like press stop or just attacking with your Aquila so it stops automatically. But if you look at these missiles, right? Look at the speed difference. Max speed and excel speed. Excel speed is basically, I think, well, obviously how fast it accelerates, but also pretty much the starting speed. It's just much, much faster. And you can also see, unlike most other ATGM helicopters, which basically have like a salvo length of 1 on their missiles, so they fire one and then the next, with like 1 second in between, right? This one fires in like semi-bursts of 2. It fires 2 very quickly. They're not fire and forget, but it's meant to simulate the fact that I think in real life the Aquila can fire essentially 2 at the same time or something like that. Which is honestly very, very neat. Like you only need like a pretty short time window to get 2 missiles out very, very fast. They fire they're literally very fast, and the second one comes out basically immediately. So that is something to keep in mind that the armor doesn't show you in game. That said, of course, Aquila is more expensive, and the Mi-28 has a turret on the gun and has some rocket pods. The thing is, though, 10 S-13s is not that big of a deal on a helicopter that costs 130 points. And the gun you wanna not use if you can, because that means you're pretty close to the enemy, which you probably want to avoid. So Iglavis are probably more useful, but you also only get 2 versus 3. And this is 20 points more expensive, so 24P is an okay all-rounder, but fixed gun again. The 24VP, however, has a turreted gun, and that gun is crazy good. It's the best helicopter gun in the game. Easily. It doesn't have the AP of a 2A42 or the French Giat, but it has a crazy rate of fire. 8 rocket pods, Kokon M's. It's incredibly good, just all-around helicopter, right? For 90 points, you get it's just incredibly versatile. Good at flanks, good at attacking. It's affordable enough, right? It's one of the best helicopters in the game, honestly. For 1 versus 1, it's like one of the best helicopters you can put in. 24V, it struggles of like too much armament, right? Yak B solid, S5s are not so great. 10 HP is kind of overkill in a way, and 8 Iglas is also overkill. If this had like 4 Iglas and just a Yak B and it was like 70 or 75 points, would be so good, but you pay for too much. It's not as bad as a 2x90 where you pay 90 points for an AA helicopter and then it's useless. It got buffed by like 10 points, right? It used to be 100 points, and I think it also has better availability now. So it's not as bad as it used to be, but it's still like quite an investment for not even like the best AA helicopter. Iglas are fine, but they're not amazing. And for 90 points, kind of expect more. You also don't have medium optics, so it's fine, just not groundbreaking. And my fours are useless, to be hyperbolic. Basically, don't bother with them. The only reason where I would ever use them is if I was playing a Cat C and I had access to these, but no other rocket bot helicopter, right? I didn't have anything with MTVs, like I'm playing Armored or something and can't use any of the MI8 MTVs, so I can only put in the MI4A. Maybe that's when I would use the MI4A, right? Don't bother with this. I think I'd rather have more S5s than the bunker Ps, but that's the only reason to ever use them. They're slow, the rockets aren't the greatest, and only 6 HP and nothing else going for them. Planes. Alright. IL-102, 2 front, 2 rear armor. If you remember with the A-10, right? Similar story. Of course, it is a bomber, though. It flies in much, much deeper. It's also faster, to be fair. But it also flies slower. It is much easier to kill than an A-10, but you can still just overload enemy airnets with this, especially if you couple it with a 25T, which also has 2 front, 2 rear armor. Of course, it's quite the investment, right? Needing, if you want to get both of those planes. But especially on like more open maps, or if you really overload the enemy AA net, it's just very hard to kill thanks to its armor. The payload is very high, of course, very big. 15 inch bombs, which just kill tons of stuff in its path, and yeah. But it's very investment heavy, and it needs the support, right? It's the A10, of course, also wants support, but it can function on its own. The IL-102 can be quite the sitting duck. 21 bis, if you need like anything up to, I think up to 5 armor you can kill with this thing. 4 armor for sure, but I think 5 armor as well. For 5 armor, you might basically need to right click on an enemy unit. Fire position is gonna struggle because you need to be pretty dead on. But it's very good like sniping AA and such. Just you want to have line of sight on it so you can right click on it, because fire position is always a bit iffy with these low AG but high number rocket bots. Yeah, that thing exists. It wants to be the Jaguar GR1 so bad, but it isn't. No ECM. If it had like 20% ECM, like a Jaguar GR1, it would be pretty solid. 4 per card, very fast to cluster bombs. Don't underestimate this, but with 0% ECM, it's just meh. 23 ml, it's a very cheap Helo Hunter. It's not the best, but keep in mind that the low tier Molnias only have a 1 second real time between missiles. Like the higher end short range missiles have 2 seconds. Something to keep in mind. MLD is the decent Helo Hunter, only comes at hardened, but has very good short range missiles. Not much else to say, really. 25 BM, it's a good seed plane. It's incredibly basic, but it's good at what it does. Good missiles, good accuracy, good range, good accuracy, good AP, 50% ECM, good speed, good time over target. Not the best turn radius, but most seeds don't have the best turn radius. It's like an ECR, right? There's nothing particularly special. It does not one-shot a Challenger Marksman, though. Only the Favao can. It's an okay cluster bomber. Affordable, solid payload, ECM, fast. Doesn't quite hold the candle to like a Aardvark or a Block 5 that have 12 cluster bombs, though. But it's fine. You don't see that often, though, because you usually run other anti-tank planes in Soviets. PD, or the Mighty have fallen, and it's still a solid plane, right? The thing with the PDs, in case you don't know, you get it on veteran, it used to be elite. And any crit with those missiles will one-shot a plane, right? The PD, the MiG-31s, and the F-14s are the only planes that can one-shot kill planes. Other planes, right? Because of their HE value. So, and with higher veterancy, of course, that also increases your crit chance. So on Elite, that thing used to crit just one-shot crit planes left and right. It still does pretty frequently, but it's a lot less consistent now. So you gotta be careful with this. But the thing is also just that if an opponent sees in the big 25 BD, everyone is always afraid trying to engage it with your own ASF because there's always like the chance that you're just gonna lose your Rafale to like a bullshit one-shot crit, right? So if that's also what you enjoy using, go for it, right? It's still a good plane. MiG-27 will, if undisturbed, kill pretty much any tank up front. Almost guaranteed when on veteran, right? With the heat gun, it will just get their like HP down to 7, and then the two missiles are gonna do the rest. Ever since people started being a lot more careful with their tanks and use smoke, semi-active missiles, and especially if you also have to rely on a gun, have become a lot less viable. 27K. It's a bit inconsistent because it's only comes at rookie tuber card, but it's fast with 30% ECM, right? So Fire and Forget on 30 AP is still pretty good. Even if it's not that consistent, it's still pretty survivable at the very least. So yeah, a very solid, good, honestly, just tank leader that you don't have to think about too much, right? And don't have to worry too much about surviving because at least you get a second one. MiG-21S is... It wants to be multi-role so bad, but it really isn't. It's not a great bomber, it's also not a great multi-role. It's not entirely horrible at either. Like, it has good short-range missiles, it has good ECM and speed, but it doesn't have the range on the missiles to like be a proper threat to other planes. And the bombs are okay, but not the best payload. And it's not like a horrible plane. It's decent to have, but it's not gonna be groundbreaking. MiG-29M is like an actual multi-role with R-77s instead. Also has medium stealth, by the way, for some reason, and 4 cluster bombs. It's a very good plane to put in if you're just like, I have a plane slot free. What am I gonna put in, right? Having a plane with R-77 is always good, and having a plane, even if it's only 4 cluster bombs, with some cluster bombs is always nice. Because that means you always have the potential to finish off a tank that got out at like 1 or 2 HP, but you don't have line of sight to it, but you know the force it's in, right? So yeah. Very, very nice plane. Again, something that is like not groundbreaking, but just so nice to have if you have it in your deck, right? It's like the type of unit that like you don't think about too much when putting in your deck because like you're like, whatever. But then every now and then there are the games where you're like, oh yeah, I have that unit and it just saved my fucking ass. Make 31s. If you're gonna use either of them, use the 31M because it has Fire and Forget on its missiles. Which is much better because I think they fire in essentially bursts of 2, if I'm not mistaken. Don't forget though, they have a pretty long aim time of 2 seconds, so they have to like look towards a plane and fly towards a plane for 2 seconds before you can turn them around. So you can't just keep circling them. If you want to have it shoot at the plane, you have to briefly like actually like fly towards it. And yeah, salvo length of 2 with short reload of 1, right? So they fire in sort of bursts, which is why I want to fire and forget 1, because the MiG-31 has 2 seconds aim time, but it has to like aim after each missile. You have to I think, or do you? I don't remember. Maybe you don't, but it's still semi-active, right? So you have to wait until you hit or miss before you can fire the next one. So that's the problem. 224 is cheap. It's a decent seed plane. It's inconsistent when down with it, but it has medium stealth and it's fast and it has okay range against most stuff. Oh, sorry, my alarm just rang and I already delayed it by like 40 minutes because I wasn't done with the video yet. 24M. It has quite a payload, but being a pure bomber, not a multi-role, means it flies rather low, but 20% only, so 20% ECM only, so it's always pretty deep. That's what she said. And yeah, it's not very survivable. 25. It's okay. The rear armor difference compared to the 25T is very noticeable, right? 2 front armor is still neat. But you really notice the rear armor because then by the time the enemy missile would hit you, you very often have turned around and then suddenly you get the full damage. It's by no means bad, but you have just better options in Soviets. The rockets can definitely be nice to like snipe AA that is like in cover, especially when they have only one armor. And even if they don't have one armor, you can very often stun or panic them to render them useless for a bit. But then, of course, if there's other AA around, you're still like, yeah, pretty quite a sitting duck sometimes. 25T, the 2 rear armor alone sometimes is worth it. It has tons of missiles, of course, and just circles, and like it's a type of unit that you just can just circle, and you don't really care if it only kills a few 5-pointers, because again, also just be a threat and a message to your opponent. If you're gonna get out of cover, you're gonna die, right? To essentially suppress and force your opponent to stay defensive, which can also be neat. And also like be a very good bait for enemy planes into your own AA or your own ASFs, because it just can tank so many missiles. I hate that plane. 27M is like the tank, the leader. It comes on veteran 430 AP missiles at full range. Basically the highest range you can get on ground targets with non-seed missiles. Also like 4 R77s with 50% ECM, and coming on veteran, it's a huge threat to both planes and ground units. Can be very frustrating. It just sometimes feels like impossible to kill because it will bully both your planes and your ground units. So yeah. At the same time, though, if you're like me and you use it and you're horribly at using it, you will just use it to like a single man pet or something, and then just be like, why do I put this 200-point piece of trash into my deck? 27S, it's fine, but there's no real reason to use it, because with the PU, if you want something high end, you have the MiG-25 PD if you want something cheaper, or the Yak 1-for-1 if you want like a mid-range cheaper card, because this one comes on veteran with Fire and Forget missiles, whereas the 27S only has them active. It's not inherently horrible by any means, right? You just have better options available. Coming only on hard means you don't get quite the accuracy boost that you'd want on a supercard plane that has some active missiles, right? The polished MiG-29, for example, has pretty much the same loadout, but you get 2 fewer R73s. No, sorry, 2 fewer R27Rs, I think. But you count veteran. So given they're semi-active, you're never really gonna use more than 2 on an incoming plane. And after an engagement, you're probably gonna evac either way. So you're paying extra points to get more Wimples you're not gonna use, and lose veterancy, which basically means you lose accuracy, right? So it's annoying. It doesn't mean they're always useless. There are situations where yes, you want 4 R27Rs, right? If all you do is shoot at bombers or something and you never took any shots, then you can keep circling. I'm not saying it is fully useless, but it usually doesn't matter that much. You'd rather have like extra accuracy, like on the Yak 1-for-1, because it comes on veteran, plus the Fire and Forget, so second one comes out before the first one even hit already. And it's cheaper as well. PU, I think, is pretty self-explanatory, just very high-end. High ECM, high-end missiles, lots of missiles, yada yada yada. Yak 38 and 38M, slow, they fly low. This actually has a decent payload, I have to say. Like for 70 points, very good payload. 415 HE bombs. The same payload that the 130-point piece of trash MiG-29S. Okay, piece of trash is an exaggeration, but the MiG-29S has. So, yeah, it just flies slow and is slow, so it dies very easily. If it was like 750 would be okay. 1000 kmh would be too much, because then it's like a J7C, but twice the bombs, which would be a bit mean. But like if this was like 750 with 10% ECM at least, I could see it being used every now and then, right? Maybe inside like very aggressive Soviet decks that just wanna be like with BTR 90s in the early game, MTVs very aggressive, and then just flood the game, the map with like the 38Ms, right? I could see something happening, but with only 600 kmh, that's where the struggle. Same with the Yak 38. 4 of the big napalm, big red 4 napalm bombs, right? They're 500 kilograms. The blue 4 are 340. Which essentially they have a higher, bigger area, I'm pretty sure. Would be an okay payload for 70 points if the plane wasn't so goddamn slow. But yeah. Alright. That's 1 hour and 44 minutes. Jesus. That's the Soviet overview. I hope you enjoyed it. My throat hurts from so much talking. And I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Bye bye.